We have Daniela Barbosa, Darrell O'Donnell, Laura Brugioni, and Tony Rose for the next panel, and I'm going to go ahead and have them come on stage now. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to be here, and I think it's awesome to follow World Mobile, who's really revolutionizing the collaboration economy. And we're here to talk about Web3 meets open source meets governance, and throw in a little bit of AI for fun there. Let's begin our journey this evening with a reflection from historian Yuval Harari. He said in his book, Sapiens, "Sapiens can cooperate in extremely flexible ways with countless numbers of strangers." This insight captures the essence of our unique human capability, the unparalleled power of collaboration, innovation, and large-scale creation. In the realm of digital technology, the spirit of cooperation has been beautifully manifested through open source initiatives. Pioneering entities like the Linux Foundation have been at the forefront, democratizing innovation and championing transparent, community-driven collaboration. But as we stand at the crossroads of a new digital epoch, we're not merely continuing the legacy of open source, we're evolving and deepening it. This brings us to the concept of Web3, which promises not just an extension, but a profound deepening of our collaborative ventures. It introduces tools and paradigms that have the potential to reshape our very understanding of collaboration. Tonight, we introduce a new term to our lexicon, fluid collaboration. It encapsulates the dynamic, adaptable, and fluid nature of collaboration in the Web3 era. With our distinguished panelists, we'll explore how the foundational principles of open source, when intertwined with the revolutionary essence of Web3 and anchored by solid governance structures, can usher in this new era of collaborative fluidity. In an age where technology transcends code, becoming a tapestry of community, trust, shared visions, and fluid cooperation, join us as we navigate this promising horizon together. I'm really pleased to introduce our panelists. Daniela Barbosa serves as General Manager, Blockchain, Healthcare, and Identity at the Linux Foundation, and as the Executive Director at Hyperledger. Laura Brugioni, founder of Student Reader, brings her extensive background in education to the forefront, with over 20 years of experience within the California community college system. And Darrell O'Donnell, Technology and Strategies Advisor at Continuum Loop and co-founder of the Trust Over IP Foundation. So let's begin our discussion with an exploration of open source, really the bedrock of modern collaboration, upon which all of our collaborations are built upon. And Daniela, let me hand it over to you to talk about your experience with open source. What is open source? How do people do it? And what are some maybe misconceptions and other reflections you may have on where open source as the foundational layer has been, is going, and where you see us going in the future?
So thank you for putting this panel together, Tony. And one of the things I want to start with is when I read that quote, when you sent us this quote and said, I'm going to start the panel with, it reminded me of the magical feeling that I'm so honored to have every single day of my life by working at the Linux Foundation and working with open source communities that are really diverse, that around the world, that are really solving some of the world's biggest problems and opportunities through that. The Linux Foundation has been mentioned quite a few times actually here on different panels and discussions, because the Linux Foundation for the last over 25 years has been the home of some of the most important open source projects. The Linux kernel, of course, is the namesake of the Linux Foundation, but today there's over 800 different open source projects across many industries, from the automotive industry to the film industry, obviously technology, finance, and over 800 different projects really addressing, as I said, important needs. Pretty much every piece of technology that you've touched today probably has open source that is being openly developed in the Linux Foundation through the collaboration of many companies, government agencies, and individuals as well. We claim to have about $55 billion worth of shared value across the Linux Foundation and all its projects. This is value that has been created by companies working together to accelerate the development of the code that then they build products and services on top. Today, we count over 250,000 developers that have contributed code to any of those Linux Foundation projects that I've mentioned. And there's hundreds and thousands of others who are not code developers who contribute and participate in our open source projects, from doing documentation to doing education to being subject matter experts around things that are really important about when the code works, how does it implement, what are the regulatory requirements that are needed. So open source, people always have this vision of the individual developer that sits in the basement in Wyoming somewhere, and that is open source. I mean, the reality is that there's a lot of work and a lot of resources that takes to make an open source project successful. And I'll very quickly just touch on the four top things that, from an open source perspective, what we've seen over the last 24 years to do that. One is that the community and the projects have to be neutral. That means that there's not one organization or one company that controls the project. And that neutrality is really important, but there has to be a framework for it. So, for example, every single meeting and every single gathering that the Linux Foundation projects have are under antitrust policy requirements. One of my favorite stories was we started a blockchain project for the insurance industry for regulatory reporting. And one of the first meetings, we had all the top insurance carriers in the room. And we were talking about, the development and what we were going to do for the project. And I remember one of the chief data architects at one of the insurance companies came up and said, and he went and he looked at everybody and said, I can't believe I'm having this conversation with my competitors. That just doesn't happen in the industry. But for the code and for them to collaboratively build, it does. So neutrality is very important. We've had a lot of conversations around governance and a lot of talks today about governance, but open governance and a duocracy. So open governance, everyone can open source their code, put it on GitHub and say, hey, I've open sourced my code. And that's fantastic. We love it when companies do that. We love it when anyone does that. And that's a great first step. But it's really about open governance. How do you understand how you can influence that code? What do you need to do to be able to influence and contribute to that code? And we call it a duocracy. Those that do will have the impact to make the changes to the codes. So number one is neutrality. Number two is open governance. Number three is IP clarity. And a lot of open source projects don't do this, and especially if you have code and you want your code to be used in the enterprise, you have to have IP clarity. You have to teach your developers about licensing and how to go about doing that. So number three is IP clarity. And number four, you can have the most beautifully open source code ever built under open governance. If you don't have a strong commercial ecosystem that brings that code to market, that is able to support the companies and the governments and the different organizations that want to do that. So at the Linux Foundation, that's what we do, right? We provide all that infrastructure from a technical support perspective to marketing to business to legal around building healthy, open source ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Linux Foundation, I think, has really shown the world that collaboration between competitors, between stakeholders that have different incentives is possible. And it's possible to do at scale, which really gets to that quote that I think Yuval Harari sort of gets to, what we're good at as people, in this era where we're starting to wonder because of AI, what is unique about us, right? And I think it really is that collaboration instinct that we have and that deep meaning that we get from working with other people on solving common problems. And as an individual, I even can reflect on my participation just coming to Linux Foundation Public Health and wondering if I can help, learning about trust over IP and becoming a part of the community just by showing up. And it's a really powerful thing that Linux Foundation has institutionalized across every industry you can imagine. Let's reflect on, with these new tools of Web3, where we now have tokenization, evolution of governance that's sort of been inspired by what Linux Foundation project governance has done. What do you see happening? How do you see synergies in this sort of realm changing the nature of collaboration, whether with code projects or other kinds of initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I'll briefly touch upon, because one of the things, the Linux Foundation has been focused on is what we call enterprise developers, right? And if you think about, an enterprise developer and the needs that they have, and then you take, maybe Web3 developers and kind of, look at the needs that they have as well. And when they need to work collaboratively, when they need to get to a solution to solve their problem or to move their project ahead, the needs are basically the same, right? And back to like the 4 core principles of what makes an open source project successful, I think the needs are the same. I am a people person. I've always been a people person. But showing up in whether it's a Discord chat in in one of the projects of the Linux Foundation, or showing up on a Telegram chat for a DAO or one of the Web3s, the environment and the way that people build trust in one another is very similar. And I think that both communities actually have a lot to learn from one another as specifically Web3 technologies start being incorporated into enterprise systems, enterprise infrastructure, and even government systems. If you think about digital identity and tokenization and central bank digital currencies, love them or hate them. So there's a lot of ways that I think both communities are learning from each other and developing new skill sets across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the enterprise developer, and it sort of triggers this idea in my mind, listening to Mickey talk about how he collaborates with the people in his network. And these aren't developers. They'll never be developers, but yet they can join and contribute to the growth of an ecosystem that's built on top of open source. It's built on top of these open collaboration, this ethos. How do you have a reflection, either Laura or Darrell, on where with this Web3 and this shift into a mode where collaboration becomes possible with people that are not necessarily interested in building the product, but maybe just being users? Is this like a new paradigm of collaboration?
Help Rare Evo showcase a variety of stake pool operators and their missions around the world. Vote for Rare Evo Catalyst Proposal number 106811, facilitating SPO travel and media production at high-value blockchain events worldwide.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think there's a whole initiative where we're looking to see how do we, we're here at Rare Evo, lots of NFTs in play. How do the artists actually participate, but how do I as an art buyer participate and actually get benefit from being part of this community? That was never possible. I'll use a swear word here, the A16Z, the VC. But Chris Dixon is releasing a new book. Web 1 was about read. We read everything. Web 2 is about read, write, but we didn't own anything. Now Web 3, we actually have that read, write, own capability. That's fundamentally different.
Yeah, and this is really, I think, Mickey used the word sharing economy, but I think the sharing economy was about my car, my apartment. I think really what's going on is it's more of a collaboration, right? I'm putting up this air node in my, and I'm becoming part of the network. I'm a collaborator in building the value of this thing, not just sharing a thing I have. So I think it's more of a collaboration economy. And sort of the insight I'm starting to see is that our ability to collaborate across multiple projects with multiple different skill sets, especially when we have the support of AI to help us become better at different things and the tools of Web3 that allow us to benefit from this collaboration. I think this is a nice segue into governance, because we talked about the governance of open source projects, how competitors can collaborate with each other. I experienced this directly during the pandemic when Linux Foundation Public Health did a lot of work related to opening air travel, and we brought in a whole bunch of people to collaborate on how we might solve that problem together. And this was done under Trust over IP, where Darrell is one of the co-founders. Darrell, maybe you can take us a little journey of Trust over IP, governance. What's different about governance with software projects versus governance with large ecosystems of many kinds of different stakeholders?
So there's a whole bunch there. Yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Trust over IP, which interestingly earlier, Charles and Fred were talking about governance and a lot of governance failures. Trust over IP really came to be because of a governance failure in that there was a network that was running, wanted to control literally everything, which is kind of anathema to this whole space. They wanted to say, hey, listen, we're going to be in control of the governance, we're going to run the network, and they basically set all the rules, at which point the community said, that's nice, you can run the network, see you later. Trust over IP was founded for the following reason, is that as techies, I'm a recovering developer, I was technical founder, lead developer, CTO for multiple companies. One sold nicely, one kind of cratered. I always wondered why my magical tech, which was really awesome, wasn't winning the day. I couldn't figure it out. Realized very later in my career that a lot of it really comes down to understanding the business and governance needs. Your tech may be awesome, but if I don't know how it fits in my business, especially with enterprise and government, I've already hamstrung my company. If I can't explain how that works, what they're looking for isn't the tech. The tech needs to work. They want to know how it's going to fit, what their role is, how do they fit into the ecosystem, which interestingly, when you get into the Web3 world, where there's a lot of smaller players, we also want to know where we play. You're going to hear a little bit from student reader from Laura. Laura's going to explain how she had a vision, but had no idea how to do it. But by setting governance rules and letting people know where they fit, created a really cool solution. But what we learned in Trust over IP was that technology has to map against the governance. So we've got 4 layers, all the way from the, really if you want to talk the ledger, all the way to the ecosystem layer, where when someone joins, I focus in on building ecosystems. So building the point where you have different players. Mickey's world of World Mobile is about ecosystems. It lets me know when I can buy a node, why I want to buy a node to satisfy my own needs, to do a capital investment and make some money on it, or other reasons, but it also lets me know as a user, how do I fit in? What am I going to pay? Who gets paid? That's what governance is all about, is letting me know how I fit in. You've got a puzzle, can I be the puzzle piece that makes this thing really work? That's really what the governance is all about. And we have to recognize, what, on the smallest of scale, what we did with Student Reader is when we're doing an ecosystem is a big word, it's a big play, and it's a long-term thing. How do you start out? You start out really with what we call a minimum viable ecosystem. And it's not like a minimum viable product. It doesn't need to work out of the gate. That's not the job of an minimum viable ecosystem. The job of a minimum viable ecosystem is simple. You want to attract and align the partners that you need, because you can't do it all. Mickey doesn't have the capital to deploy in one country right now. Forget the globe. Mickey needs to attract people who are willing to deploy capital, to buy the nodes, to deploy the nodes. He'll generate some revenue and go and work with the regulators in every individual country, but he scales because his partners know where they fit. Minimum viable ecosystem, he started out in Tanzania attracting and aligning a few partners. This is what Student Reader is doing. A lot of moving parts that Laura will describe. The people, when I think it was Tony was one of the people behind the ideas going, hey, we could do this, and everyone's like, oh my God, I can't do that. It was too many things. But once you separate it into the here's doing what to whom and getting what benefit from the system, it became a lot easier. So it really becomes about how do I fit in, and this also comes down to the open source. If you're a developer, if you're a tester, if you're a documenter, if you're a business person, Hyperledger is a good example. That's where the code, by the way, from that network that fractured lives on at Hyperledger, because the code people moved over there as well. It's a place where you basically, how do I fit in? How do I fit in, add value, and how do I get value from doing this?
Thank you, Darrell. I think one of the common threads between the open source movement, governance, and Web3 is open, transparent, and equitable access to participate. And the governance of projects like Code, those best practices are finding their ways into the way in which you build trust between contributors initially, so they can then work together, have those conversations about how do we want to structure our ecosystem, what do we want to agree to in terms of the rules of the road for our ecosystem. And these governance concepts are a little more difficult to grasp for Web3, for the future of collaboration. And Web3 has drawn in a lot of new people that are attracted to various aspects of this, whether it's the technology or the art or the trading or mooning or like whatever it might be. There's a whole new wave of people coming into this world because there's new interests besides, beyond building operating systems or enterprise applications. There's these kinds of things. And so I've been quite excited about the Student Reader project because not only is it a phenomenal, fun project that's doing real impact, but it's an opportunity for us to show an ecosystem governance framework that is relatively simple, but is demonstrating the best practices of how this works. And I don't want to go in too much of the weeds because I think it's really interesting to hear from Laura, who doesn't have a technical background, but is an expert in education and has a lot of passion for students and helping students get the materials they need. So Laura, maybe give us a little bit of your background, how Student Reader came about in your journey and where you see the future going.
So I always kind of start off by apologizing that I'm not technical, but I'm not going to do that today because I feel that in this space in Web3, because of like the Linux Foundation and our community collaborations, I don't have to be technical. I had a vision. Well, let me first start off. I met Book.io guys, and because I'm in education and I see how course content is very expensive, students don't own this content when it's digital. Your device owns it, or you lose it in a couple days. When I met Book.io and saw what they were doing with NFT books, I thought, oh my God, this is gonna change education. And it might not change it in a year or two, but I think it's gonna definitely make a huge impact in the next couple of years. But I started thinking, like, we can deliver course readers, which is content that instructors build to teach their classes. And they do this to lower the cost of books, so students have, that flexibility and be able to take their courses. So I thought we're gonna do this. We're gonna mint books through NFTs, through Book.io. But at CNFTCon, talking about collaboration, I started talking to different platforms, different founders for different projects, and we realized that we could do more than just deliver content. What we decided to do is mint the NFTs with some of the proceeds of these fees. We could create a scholarship treasury, and there's so many people involved. There's Oracles, there's Marlowe, there's Summon Platform, there's Book.io. We used IMX to verify our authors, to make our NFT a verified NFT. It just opened up a new world for me, thinking of how our course content can do more than just be, course content. It could actually deliver scholarships. So through our partnerships with Danian Labs, Power Learn Project, and African Blockchain, we are identifying students from their learning institutions to receive a student credential. We're airdropping them this NFT to give them access to the content, because this NFT actually opens up the Atala Prism course. And once they complete that Atala Prism course, they get a course completion credential. And with those two credentials, their student credential and their course completion credential, they can request the scholarship. We tested our scholarship earlier this month, the redemption process, and it worked. It was such a great day. It was amazing to actually see it in action. And now like I said, we're identifying our first cohort of 10 students, and we're hoping we can follow their journey and learn more about them. And that's really what Student Reader wants to do now, is not just deliver course content through NFTs, but make it easier for technical and non-technical students to get education, which is more accessible and affordable. And I thank everybody in the Cardano community, because without you guys, there's no way we could have done this. It's definitely a collaborative project.
For someone that's not technical, that was a lot of technical acronyms. Very cool.
I'm learning.
Yeah, and congratulations on the 10 students going live, getting real scholarships, getting all this together and spearheading that initiative. I think it deserves a round of applause, really.
Thank you.
It's stories like that why I show up at work every morning.
Exactly. We're getting to the point where this technology journey that I've been on my whole career, and I think a lot of us have been, we're starting to get to the point where we're reaching really broad mass appeal. Mickey's talking about getting connectivity to more people. We're talking about getting books to more people. This has been decades, generation of professionals in the works, where now someone can throw an air note on their house and participate in an economy that's I think different than a sharing economy. This is sort of what we're sort of exploring. Really, the concept here is this really a new form of collaboration that we're moving into? Darrell, could you just give us a bit of explanation of the ecosystem governance framework of Student Reader and how this works? Because to the average person, I think understanding what Laura said, it makes perfect sense, but how does someone like Student Reader take this idea, instill a foundation that allows it to grow from this initial project with 10 students to something that might turn into a much larger impact?
Yeah, so one of the things we did with the Student Reader group was there were probably about 10 or 11 players. So I'm providing an oracle, and what we tried to do when we do this minimum viable ecosystem is to pare it down to who are the ones that really, really matter. Because they're the ones that are going to be driving the scholarship movement. So what we realized, there were only, I think, 4 key rules, not 11, which made it a lot simpler to say, hey, there's someone who is responsible for issuing a student credential. And it says, and here's what a student credential means. It's a nice lightweight thing that says this is a student in my educational institution. That can be in a university all the way through to someone running a casual daycare. Then we identified, obviously, that there needed to be someone who was saying, well, this person has completed the course, and they may not be the same person, because we're seeing virtual schools popping up. The student had a role, but their role was actually relatively minor because they're receiving the credentials. Then there needed to be the treasury, which was basically a signing off to say, we're actually going to go and say, hey, does the student ID, do they have one? Does it match the course credential student? Okay, good. Are there funds available, and have they claimed the funds before? So that was really collapsing a few different technology pieces into really one role. So the whole idea there is it was setting the baseline for that simple governance. And if I could use as an example, there's a great book for those of us in this space. It's written by Dee Hock, the founder of, it's called One from Many, by the founder of Visa, back when Visa was a good guy, back when it was really actually all about the partnership that could never happen right now with the banks. But if you go and look at Visa and MasterCard and Amex and what they are today, they have massive technology. We in the Web3 space like to say transactions per second, and Visa's at 10,000. That's cool. That's not the magic. If you took away that transaction per second, they could go find another technology in about 4 days and be back up to 10,000 transactions per second. But if you took away their governance, the whole thing would crumble. And they started out simple. They only had, I think, 3 or 4 rules in their governance. And I remember seeing, Tony, I think you pulled up a screen that showed all of the players in the credit card ecosystem. There had to be 50 wildly different roles. But they got there over time, decades of time. So the whole advice we've got on the ecosystem is start small. Make sure it's the right little pieces you need.
Yeah, I think this is one of the key insights that's come out of the work that Trust Over IP has done. And it kind of mirrors a lot of the best practices coming out of product development. Build an MVP first, right? In the similar way, when you're building an ecosystem where you have to align incentives from various stakeholders and do things like deploy world node economics or students getting scholarships, start with that minimal viable ecosystem, get that thing running, make sure your incentives are aligned so that people are incentivized to continue participating and collaborating in that ecosystem. So, fantastic work at Trust Over IP. Let's give a round of applause for Trust Over IP for all of their hard work. And even though the governance framework for student readers, quite simple, only talks about a couple of the stakeholders, I encourage you to go to studentreader.io and read it. It's only a few pages, but it gives an example of what these are. So it demystifies governance. because it's really not that complicated. It's more about getting people to talk to each other, which requires building initial trust. And I would like to recognize the Cardano community for putting Student Reader together, because over the whole course of minting the NFT book, Laura mentioned the VNFT, that means that a holder of the book knows that it was authorized by the author because it's been verified with the minting of the NFT. And that was done by IMX and NMaker. The book was minted by Book.io. The Summon platform is providing the multi-signature wallet for the trust, where the funds go after the sale of the NFT book, and they sit there in the trust until the scholarship is ready to be deployed. And then the Marlowe team at IOG has built the Oracle and the smart contract, and the Atala Prism team has provided the Atala Prism, but it's Proofspace that actually built the application on top of Atala Prism that allows you to issue student ID credentials and issue course completion credentials integrated to Canvas for all of this. So there's been a lot of moving parts and a lot of collaboration to make this possible, and I think it really is just the beginning. And so thank you, Cardano community, for making this possible. Any final words? Oh, let's take some questions. Are there questions in the audience? And we can wrap up in a minute or two.
Well, I mean, we've got a program where we've got a bunch of students in schools, and we're starting student clubs, and we're working with World Mobile and Cornucopias and several other. Our goal is to integrate Cardano projects into schools and into communities. So we're going to be coming up, saying hi pretty soon. I just want to say that's awesome. How's your experience been talking to students, to parents? Because I can tell you how ours has been. We're focusing on telecommunications and less on NFTs and blockchain. They like to hear about, a telecommunications club, that's awesome. A crypto club, an NFT, they look at me funny. So I'm kind of curious how that's going with you guys.
So Student Reader isn't talking to the students right now. Like I said, we've collaborated with Power Learn Project, African Blockchain, and Adanian Labs. Their students are already interested in Web3 technologies, so it's been easy for them to kind of make those connections. For myself, working at a community college, when I first started hearing about Book.io and I started thinking I'm going to create course content and mint them as NFTs, instructors don't understand it. So it's very difficult, and me not being technical, them not being technical, it's hard for them to get it. But I think as we bring people into this space and do these NFTs as course readers, they'll start to understand it. And we also have these Foundations of Decentralized Identity book cards that we've been giving out. We can hand you some. I've been doing that on my college, and people understand that because it's a scratch off, and you go into a website and you put in the code. It gets a little bit more difficult when you start talking about wallets and cryptocurrency, but I think Book.io is making it super easy to start selling these because of these, cards, and now they're taking credit cards to purchase these NFTs. So I think it's going to become easier and easier. It's just telling people about it, making them understand, just like I didn't understand until I actually saw it and went through it, how easy it can be.
I think it's also important to note that for Student Reader, the content isn't as important. It just happens to be the first book was on decentralized identity, which is a pretty geek, wonky thing. It could just as easily be telecommunication or French or, learning to, how to influence and learn things. The experience, though, as Laura points out, is getting easier and easier. At some point, no one's going to care or know that underneath it is this Cardano thing. They may recognize
underneath
the
that
logo.
is open source. Underneath that
Open
is
source.
TCP/IP, right?
Yep.
I think we should wrap so we don't take up too much time from the.
I think we already
one more
did.
question.
Minimal viable ecosystem. Happy to chat later.
Yeah, we'll come and chat after this. We'll talk about MVEs
We're already
for hours. Yeah.
4 minutes over time.
Was there one more question here? It's available now. So the first 10 students will be getting their scholarships in the next week or two. If you want to meet us,
Tony has the NFT.
Yeah, we have it. So Book.io is doing a happy hour. We'll be there handing them out. And final comment, I think it's really important in our industry to show, not tell. And by showing, it forces us to get code to production and to fix the UX issues, which will accelerate adoption.
I spend my life educating people for free. I told you guys.